Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ben Buchanan. I'm the co-founder of NovoPsych, and we're joined tonight by David Hegarty, who is the brains behind the statistics at NovoPsych. So welcome, David, as well. We're going to be talking about understanding the benchmarks for therapy success. What does successful therapy look like? After all, the reason we all work in mental health is because we care about making a difference in people's lives. And so tonight's really an opportunity to step back and think, how much of a difference are we making? What proportion of the clients are we helping? What's a realistic expectation? Because we're not superheroes after all. We'll also be using outcome data to tell a professional story. Often we get bogged down in seeing client after client. And so using the numbers helps us zoom out and see where we're at and tell a bit of a story. And we're going to be exploring the use of data in reflective practice. We're not just going to be thinking about how we can reflect internally, because that can sometimes turn into navel gazing. We're going to be looking at some objective data that can help us in that process. So I want to contextualize tonight in talking about measurement. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're getting a house renovation and you invite a few builders around, and there's this one builder that comes around and he doesn't bring a tape measure, and he says to you, "Oh, look, I don't use standardized measurements in my building practice. I go with the feel of things. I don't believe in inches or centimeters, metrics or imperial. I can just sense how big, how tall things are." If a builder said that to you, he wouldn't be getting your job, I'd imagine. And we appreciate that in some professions, measuring is of intrinsic importance. And indeed, a bricklayer uses a guide rope to measure whether they are laying the bricks correctly and straight so that they can get corrective feedback if they go off course. Yet, mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, we're a bit different. In many ways, it's just the expectation of patients that all we need is a notepad and pen. We don't need any measuring stick whatsoever. But this has been changing recently. And the advent of measurement-based care means that more of us are using standardized measures in our practice. And certainly I'll be arguing tonight that is really helpful. I want to talk a little bit about measurement-based care. Measurement-based care is a bit of a new term. It's a synonym for routine outcome monitoring, progress monitoring, also very similar to feedback-informed treatment. And certainly I think most of you are NovoPsych users, so most of you will probably already do measurement-based care a little bit. Measurement-based care is defined as the systematic use of symptom monitoring scales and the use of those results to drive decisions at the level of the individual patient. So really using standardized measures to aid in our decision-making. And I want to contrast standard care versus measurement-based care. So therapy, or in fact, most mental health treatments go something like this. There's an assessment, like a clinical interview. Then we make some sort of formulation. We might start developing that formulation within a few minutes of meeting them, or it might take us a long time to develop that formulation. We might do a formal diagnosis or not, but we need to have an idea or a concept about who we're dealing with, what their presenting issue is. And then we engage in treatment, whether that be CBT, ACT, psychopharmacotherapy, whatever it is, whatever treatment. And then we finish. And we finish when the goal is reached, hopefully, the outcome is achieved. But I suppose my challenge to you is that how do we know that our outcome is reached? And I know that this is presenting a rather sanitized view of what standard treatment is, and treatment is often much more messy than this without clearly defined boundaries between assessment, formulation, and treatment. But I still don't think that we've got a clear sense of when to finish therapy. And of course, one thing that we could do to aid with that is that we could look at treatment outcomes. We could give a self-report measure at the start and at the end. For me personally, I use the DAS at the start and at the end to see, has treatment been successful or not? But that's not really enough for measurement-based care. There's more to it than that. Measurement-based care also had progress monitoring. So using a measure, not just the start and the end, but in the middle as well. And measurement-based care, we use it in the formulation stage to aid with that. For doing all of those things, we're looking at outcomes, we're doing treatment monitoring, we're using assessments in the early stages, we're doing measurement-based care. And I want to just talk briefly about an individual client of mine to demonstrate what this might look like. So this is a client where I'm presenting the DAS percentiles, where on the y-axis it's a percentile compared to the general population. So anything above the 90th percentile is considered to be really severe. And this person was severely depressed when I first started seeing them in 2018. And in fact, they remained very depressed until January 2019. But then they recovered. And in August of 2019, I asked this young man, I said, look how much progress you've made. You were really depressed back then. You're on the 99th percentile on depression, and now you're doing much better. What do you think it is that helped you? Why have you recovered? And of course, what I wanted him to say is, I wanted him to say, Ben, it's because you're just like an amazing therapist. And those CBT skills you did were just amazing. But he didn't. He said, I got a girlfriend. And I was a bit jealous, honestly. I was like, oh, it wasn't me. But then when we looked at it, we saw actually he got the girlfriend in late 2018, and that actually did not coincide with his recovery. And so we looked through our notes and he looked through his diary and we thought about it a little bit more. And what we discovered was that at the start of 2019, he decided to go back to study teaching postgrad at uni. And that act of making the decision was a real symbol for him in terms of taking control of his life, living consistently with his values. And from that point on, we knew that him living consistently with his values was the key thing that was going to be protective for his mental health. And I don't think we would have got that clear insight if it wasn't for this data that we had from the DAS and the graphs that NovoPsych produced. And so here's another client with 3 episodes of care. First episode of care, I did CBT. They did amazingly well. Instead of showing the 3 symptom clusters on this, it's just showing general distress using the DAS again. And so I discharged him after he reduced heaps, but then he represented. And so I kept on doing the same thing, more CBT and more CBT, but he wasn't getting better. And because I had this data, I was able to see that he wasn't getting better. And I referred him into a group focused on self-compassion and mindfulness practice. And he got remarkably better very quickly. And so here again is the use of data to really clearly see that what I was doing just wasn't working. And the other upshot of having this data is when I referred him into this group, that therapist who worked at my practice was really chuffed to see that while I couldn't make a difference for this young man, that she could. But tonight isn't really about thinking about individual clients. It's really about thinking about using data as a whole, zooming out. What can we learn from thinking about collecting all of this data from individual patients and thinking, what can we learn about ourselves individually as a profession, how we can use it for our own professional development. But the basis of all of this is the belief that collecting outcomes is beneficial, and certainly beneficial from the client's point of view. I think there's data to show that it improves treatment response, reduces dropout, and so on. But let's think about how effective therapy is in general. We all got into this game because we wanted to make a difference in people's lives. But I'd guess that many of us, when we see client after client, we end up feeling as good as the last client that walked out our door. If we had a terrible session or a terrible day, some days we might think, I don't know if I'm making a difference at all. Certainly I've thought that before. And we all know that the published literature shows that therapy is supposed to be effective. But what does the real world data say? And here are some benchmarks. Between 50 and 76% of clients significantly improve. There's a big range, 50 and 76%. This data some of that data comes from the Better Access Review, the big Australian review that occurred last year, where they reviewed the effectiveness of Medicare for psychologists and other therapists. And they found, in that research, it found that the best evidence shows that 50% of people that are accessing better access services are having significant improvement. The other metric that's important is how many people get worse with therapy. One of the great things about therapy is that it doesn't have a very bad side effect profile. Like, we tend to not cause very much harm, thankfully. In fact, hopefully most of us. But there will always be a proportion of people that don't benefit during therapy, and even some that probably therapy maybe harms. One metric that I know lots of private practices look at is dropout rates. There's different ways of calculating this, but dropout rates are, I suppose, a barometer of engagement. How much is the therapist able to engage those clients? And because of the sort of commercial imperative of private practices, that's often the one that gets looked at, also because it's often the easiest to calculate. And then finally, the other way of thinking about treatment effectiveness is Cohen's d, which is a standardized measure of treatment effectiveness that I'll talk about in depth a little bit more. And so I'd like you to think about, how do you define treatment success? Do any of these really resonate for you, or is there something different? And if there's something different, I suppose the challenge is, how do we measure that? With the top one, the proportion of clients improving, that could be improving on the DAS, improving on any standardized measure. One of my favorite measures to use is a measure in NovoPsych called the valuing questionnaire, which is a measure of how consistently with one's values a patient is living. So it's like a acceptance and commitment therapy-based measure. But I think that therapy outcomes are measurable. It's just that it's hard to know how we're doing. And in fact, I was talking to a practice leader yesterday who said that, who in his practice, he's been collecting outcomes for a decade now, and he presents them at conferences. And he said that every time he goes to a conference, it would take him 100 hours to collect all of the data and figure out how effective the practice had been in the last year. And some of what we hope to do today is show you that instead of taking 100 hours, you can learn some of these metrics with one click of a button. So I want to give you a bit of a stats lesson first, and I'm sorry about the stats lesson. I just want to talk about Cohen's d, because it's really the way that a standardized way we can think about treatment effectiveness. Here you can see two distributions. This is the distribution of the DAS scores, the total score at the first assessment and at the last assessment. And so this is actual data and from my practice. And so you can see that at the first assessment with the DAS, the majority of people are in the severe range. And then at the last assessment, so this is after they've done therapy, the distribution shifts down so that the average is in the moderate range And a D of 1 means that there's one standard deviation between the two distributions. And what we're finding is that a D of 1 is fantastic. What we're finding is with NovoPsych data that the average change pre and post treatment is 0.67. And certainly, yeah, we think that that's a standardized benchmark that we can be measuring ourselves against. And let's just contextualize this in comparison to other well-known treatments. So if psychological therapy has roughly a Cohen's d of 0.67, or on this particular graph, I'll put it as 0.7, that's 5 times more effective than paracetamol for back pain. Thank goodness. I've never found paracetamol very helpful myself. Therapy is way more effective than doubling of income to produce happiness. So I want you to remember this, because every time you are doing therapy with someone, you're producing way more happiness for that person than if they were to have their income double. And if that's not an argument for value for money, I don't know what is. Therapy is also more effective than antidepressants for major depression, corticosteroids for asthma. It's about the same as exercise for delaying cognitive decline in older adults. Exercise is surprisingly effective at a lot of things, so we shouldn't just exercise for our health. It also helps our brain, and it's slightly less effective than flu vaccine is for illness severity. So I suppose the take-home message is therapy works. It's a good treatment in comparison to lots of other treatments. It's great. There's some data showing that it's better than some surgeries in terms of producing a far higher Cohen's d. So the work that we're doing is great, but we still don't know how we're doing. We know how therapy is supposed to be, but how are we doing? I want to highlight one particular study that examined whether experience matters. This particular study, published in 2016, looked at a couple of dozen therapists, and they found an average effect size of 0.94, which is pretty good. And then they looked at the years of experience that those therapists had, and they found that the more years of experience someone had, the less effective they became. You can see that the blue line represents a straight line, and then the dotted line is the trend line down. And what they found is that 39% of therapists were improving over time. The majority, 61% of therapists, deteriorated. And the trend for lower effectiveness remained present even after controlling for various confounding variables. So this was pretty disheartening when I saw this. I thought, surely experience matters. And I think some people, when they were saying, in fact, 42% of people in that poll I did said that they'd choose someone with a great deal of experience recommending a friend. It turns out that way of thinking is not going to yield good results. And so in an effort to maintain how good we are, professions have said, all right, we've got to engage in supervision and other continual professional development activities. But the other really disheartening thing is that evidence shows that while supervision might help us feel more confident and might help our professional identity, it doesn't actually help our outcomes. There is one study showing that high quality supervision accounts for like 1% of variance in outcomes, but the rest of the studies show that it doesn't do anything. There's also a bunch of data showing that credentials and even what profession you're in doesn't really make a difference. What certifications you've got, endorsements, doesn't make a difference. That therapists engaging in personal therapy, that doesn't matter either. And of course, the years of clinical experience doesn't matter. So what are we to do? What are we to do? How are we going to get better? I want to highlight one practice that did get better. It's actually the same researcher as the previous one, showing that therapists on average get worse over time. This researcher looked at a totally different practice, different sample, and showed that this practice, on average, therapists were getting better, and the practice as a whole were getting better. And they wanted to know why. And so they looked at what this particular practice did. And what they did was that they were specifically encouraged to discuss the patients that were not, to identify the patients that weren't improving and to discuss them. And they had an open forum for discussing therapy failures. And so this shows that we can get better. And this particular practice, firstly, they knew what their outcomes were. Each therapist could see how individual patients were going. They could see how they were going as a therapist, how they were tracking over time. And they engaged in deliberate practice and in particular identified therapy failures. So what is deliberate practice? Well, it's a few things. It's measuring our baseline performance as therapists. How are we going? Obtaining specific and ongoing feedback, engaging in practice through rehearsing, evaluating the plan for improvement. So making changes and then measuring it. Is what I'm doing working? Am I getting better or worse over time? And importantly, and I think this is a really important one, having a spirit and a culture of quality improvement. I can imagine that in some practices that if they could all see how they were going as a therapist, it could actually promote a lot of anxiety. And so we really need that key ingredient of having a spirit and a culture of quality improvement and a growth mindset. I want to talk about Tiger Woods for a moment. So he was an epic golfer, and he was amazing at driving the ball. He had the best drive in the game, but his putting wasn't so good. And Tiger Woods would spend the vast majority of his time practicing his putting. He didn't need to practice what he was already good at. He needed to identify his weakness and practice that. And I think as psychologists and therapists, that's also what we've got to do. And so we're not very good at identifying therapy failure. Using our clinical judgment, we don't identify the majority of clients that are getting worse. I gave you that example of that client that I did one course of therapy with and then tried another time, but it just didn't work. The research shows that in all odds, I wouldn't have noticed that this person wasn't improving. And that's because I think that us humans, we're not very good at remembering how a patient was last week, last month, last year, but graphs and computers are perfect at that. And a large study showed that while 20% of patients deteriorated, only 8% of those patients were identified by the therapist. And so we really need systems in place to identify patients that aren't doing well so that we can spend more time learning from them what we need to do differently, what we need to do better. And the research also around why collecting feedback and doing measurement-based care or routine outcome monitoring helps is not that it helps us do even better with the clients we were already doing well with. It doesn't really make a difference there, but what it does help is it helps the clients that we weren't doing well at and reduces the number that are deteriorating. And by doing that, we can lift our overall results. So I've talked a little bit about the sort of background and the context. And what I want to do now is I want to pass to David to talk about some of the features that we hope are going to make you thinking about your own practice and identifying your strengths and weaknesses really easy. Instead of taking 100 hours, we hope that it will take a click of the button. Take it away, David.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. So this is what we have developed for NovoPsych that we're calling Insights. And so if you're within the NovoPsych app and you enable Insights, this is the little icon that you'll see up the top appear. And if you click on that, you'll get all this information. Now, there's a lot there, and I'm going to try and just go through as quick as I can a broad summary of what you can do and what things are available to you. First of all, I draw your attention to this kind of bar across the top here. And currently we're on the Active Clients tab. And there's a number of things available. And each of these just show different aspects of your data. So you can pull apart your data in different ways. So that's the first thing. The next thing is this part down the left-hand side. So this is to do with what data you're looking at and how you pull apart the data. So you can filter it in many different ways, which I'll show to you. So the first is you can filter by whether you're looking at all clients, active clients only, or inactive clients, clients that you're no longer seeing. That setting is just within the NovoPsych app, whether you set someone as active or inactive, and that's how it's filtered. The assessments that we have available for you to look at your data for at the moment, we've got 10 of them. So 3 DASs there, the GAD7, PSC17, 2 of the cores, PHQ9, and 2 of the K10s. We're very close to putting in the PCL5 as well. And so each of these, the data is separated apart for that specific test. The DAS21, it's showing the symptom descriptors or the severity descriptors for the DAS21 across this plot particular here. The other thing you can do is you can, within your NovoPsych app, you can create groups. You can do this whatever way you like, where you might be testing, whether it's group work, where you're trying different therapy approaches. And so you can separate out the groups. This is just sample data here, so it's just a very small group that we've created here. And so it just filters that data automatically, so you can separate it how you like. The next thing, so that's your data selection. This is then the filtering. So we can filter by date. So say I'm wanting to look at data that's just maybe in 2020. Okay, and then it just filters that. Okay, I can reset it to all data. And that's the initial intake. That's clients that started between those dates. Then we can filter by the initial intake scores. If I only want to see the clients that were really quite severe I can filter by that. I can filter by the number of weeks between first and last assessment, filtered by clients that have been seeing longer term or just very short-term clients. And then lastly, I can filter by age as well. Now, the age one is obviously very dependent upon you entering those correct date of births in NovoPsych. If you don't, we tend to just put a default date of birth. I think it's 1800 or something. And so they'll come out as 200 years old. So you'll know straight away that's obviously not right. And it's age put in there. Last thing I want to point out at the bottom is just some client details of the data that you're actually looking at. Okay. So this active clients tab, this is looking at the latest assessment results for all your clients. And this first plot here is just showing, okay, what's the severity of the clients in their last assessment that I'm seeing? And so you might be then more focused on looking at these clients that are up this end. And as you see, it just, when you hover over, it just shows your name and shows you their latest score. There's a plot there that shows you your just overall severity overview. So you can see the breakdown of most of my clients are in the moderate range. Some of the other plots we've got down here, you'll see this one's cut off at that mark. That's because I have that data filtered. If I just show all that, you can see it fills it in. If I'm wanting to filter out for clients that are in mild or above, That's showing me the first versus last assessment. Okay, so say this is someone that hasn't improved significantly. So their first score was 54, their latest assessment score is 49. So I can see there's not much improvement. This person I can see has done really well, whereas this person has deteriorated. Okay, so it's a quick, easy way for you to see in your data who are my clients that I might need to focus on. And this is another similar kind of plot, but this one kind of adds another dimension to it. This shows the change in score from the first to last. Okay, so you want to be down in this green area to show improvement, but it also plots it against time. Okay, so the treatment length in weeks, you can change that to the number of assessments. Its default is weeks. And we can then see here, for this dummy data, the median treatment length is, 27 weeks. And then we have a 90th percentile over here. So that's sitting at around about 102 weeks. So we could say this top 10%, these are our really long-term clients. Okay, you can see some of these are doing really well. You might have this person here who's you've been seeing for a long time, or even all of these people in here that you've been seeing for a long time, but you can see they're either not improving or they're deteriorating. And they might be then some of the focus. And that was what Ben was talking about just previously. That focus and discussion about who it's not working for is important.
And I think that plot is particularly useful when thinking about which clients we're going to take to supervision. Often, being a supervisor myself and just observing who my supervisees want to talk about, they often want to talk about the brand new client that they've just seen for one or two sessions that they're still getting to know, and they just want to use the supervision as a forum to explore that a little bit further. But really, the best use of supervision is to identify the clients that you've been seeing for a long time and who aren't getting better. They're the clients that you're stuck with. And that graph simply shows that if you've been seeing them for higher than the 90th percentile, so seeing them for a long time, and they're in the red zone, this is someone that perhaps consider discharging, bringing to supervision, changing the treatment approach, or thinking about more deeply. And same people in the gray zone, which means they haven't improved. And of course, each one of these dots is just a data point on a Y and an X-axis, but each one of those dots represents a human being with a story that you probably know intimately and whose life is complicated. And all this graph does is take away all of that noise and help us to zoom out and just see how many of our clients are getting better, worse, or staying the same right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. So there's lots of other detail I could go into, and there's lots of information there, lots of information about where our data's come from and how it's calculated as well. The next tab I'd show you is the summary data one. Okay, so this is just showing you that, like, overall. So whereas this one is more of a focus on your active clients, this is an overall kind of summary to show how effective am I. And this is showing that 71% of my clients are improving on their DAS score over time. That's just a simple score. The latest score is lower than the first score, the first administration. Some other summary data there as well. This is the effect size plot that Ben showed you in his presentation just previously. So you can see that my effect size here is 0.69. I can turn on that normalized effect size that Ben talked about, which was 0.67. So you can see this is very similar results. If I change this to just look at more extreme cases, maybe, you can see that my effect size increases because I'm starting up higher, and you'd hope to see that if I'm filtering out those clients that are not so severe on intake. So that's all changes according to what you do on the side here. Let's change that back to 15. And the same thing with this effect size comparison that Ben showed as well. So this shows your data. So this is a made up name for this data here. And it shows the effect size, it shows a confidence interval for it, which you can turn off, because sometimes if the numbers are low, the confidence interval could be really big, might make it hard to read. So it shows that compared to everyone else. And if I'm changing that, you'll see the effect size changes compared to everything else there. That's a very simple one, just average change, average score on first and last assessment. Now, this is the reliable change index. So this is, showing significant improvement. So this is more of a statistical concept that deals with measurement error within the test as well. It's a bit more harsh in terms of showing whether something is improved or not. And that was that measure that then said roughly 50% in the better access review showed significant improvement. The grey is showing little change, and then we have a number of deteriorated as well. Again, this will change. If I change these graphs, it changes everything. Same with all of this data. That's why this is really powerful, because I can filter my data down to whatever I'm wanting to look at, which is really important. Trajectory. Okay, this plot, it's similar to that one on the active clients of the change score over time. I can show the raw data, but what this is doing, it's just showing a trend line. So if I show the raw data, it might make a bit more sense. It's plotting all of the first scores at time 0. And so this line of best fit is that the average here of that. And then this is over time, and this extends out to 154 weeks or something. So I can extend that out to see what happens over time. And so what you can see with this data, with this dummy data, is that, okay, most of my clients that I see, they roughly improve by that's maybe 30 weeks or so. And then I get a little upkick where maybe some clients are getting worse over time, but then those longer term clients, they generally then get better again and kind of end up in that mild range, even though they start off at moderate. Again, totally filterable by all this on the side here as well. This tab is showing you treatment length. Okay, so we've chosen, there's weeks or assessments on this x-axis that you could change. So this is weeks between the first and last assessment. So this is clients then that I would have been seeing for a long time. Okay, it's over 6 months between the first and last assessment. This is very short-term clients. And so you can start to see what effect am I having depending upon the length of time that I'm seeing clients. And there's some more data down there as well in a table. And the last one is just simply a data table that shows all the data that we're looking at, and you filter again, and it just filters that data. So that is Insights. Like I said, it's available in NovoPsych's web app. By web app, I just mean within the browser. It works on the app on iPad as well, but it does just work within the browser, because I had someone else still asking that question. So it's within the browser, and if you enable Insights, that would be all available to you. And I'll throw you back to Ben.
Thanks for that, David. There are some very enthusiastic people who have tried to do this themselves. Certainly, I did in my practice myself. We used Excel. I think we actually broke Excel because Excel wasn't powerful enough to do it. And anyone that has tried to do it themselves knows that this is going to save them a huge amount of time. But the other huge response that I get is professional self-doubt. People saying, I don't know if I want to know. People that have that underlying nagging feeling that maybe they'll be exposed. Maybe they're not a good therapist. Maybe they would prefer not to know. In fact, I've had people say to me, I'd prefer not to know. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about this, because I think this is a major barrier for lots of people. And firstly, I just want to highlight that there's actually no correlation between someone's self-rating of how effective they think they are as a therapist and their actual effectiveness. So whether you think you're a great therapist or if you think you're a terrible therapist, it doesn't actually predict how good a therapist you actually are. The other thing to consider is that if you are experiencing self-doubt, imposter syndrome, to know that high levels of professional self-doubt actually predict better patient outcomes and have been shown to be an antidote to inaccurate self-appraisal. High professional self-doubt is associated with higher levels of patient alliance with a therapist. And as we know, alliance, the relationship, is a significant predictor of outcomes. And among therapists, professional self-doubt, especially when coupled with self-compassion, has been shown to be positively related to patient progress in treatment. So if you're one of those people that when we showed you this and said, oh, you can do this, you can know this stuff about you is now knowable, and you had that feeling in your gut that, oh, that's anxiety, just know that the fact that you've got that professional self-doubt is actually a good thing, because professional self-doubt shows that you're taking responsibility for your client outcomes. It gives you a sense of curiosity, and it's associated with continued growth and development. And I want to contrast now two different mindsets that I observe among therapists. There's the expert mindset, otherwise known as the fixed mindset. When I talk to fixed mindset therapists, they often talk quite authoritatively about evidence-based practice in this research study and that research study. But I've also observed that when a client of theirs doesn't have a good experience in therapy, they say something like, it's the client's fault, the client wasn't therapy ready. The other trait that I've noticed is expert therapists collecting all of the different certifications, being certified in EMDRs, chemotherapy, getting lots of certificates, and then telling other people that they're certified. And the other thing that I've seen is people not really asking for feedback, not really being open for feedback. I've seen people in peer supervision contexts presenting clients, but really you can tell they don't really want to hear any feedback. And I imagine that they don't want to hear any feedback from their patients either. And I want to contrast this with what I think is more effective therapists. And those are therapists with a growth mindset, those that are curious and open to new beliefs and practices. These are therapists that are keen to develop practice-based evidence and systematically review their work. These are therapists that are not afraid of their errors, that reflect on the clients that didn't improve, and they take responsibility for that. They routinely review treatment failures. One thing that I hope Insights will do is not only be a reminder to people that we're doing great work, but also help highlight the at-risk clients. Effective therapists also have a feedback mindset. They look for more and more opportunities to get new information and critical feedback. And so I hope that Insights as a tool will be helpful for these therapists with a growth mindset. And so I want to talk a little bit about the Cobb theory of reflective practice and the cycle of learning that Insights might be able to facilitate. The first step is to have a concrete experience, having an experience in a therapy room, or the experience of looking at your outcome data and thinking, how am I going? Next step is having a reflective observation, really thinking about it, spending some time to think about it. And then an abstract conceptualization, concluding or finding something that you can learn from this new information you've got from this concrete experience. And then experimenting, seeing, okay, what can I do differently that's going to give me a different experience? And then, of course, the more concrete that new experience can be, the more you'll learn, because the high quality the feedback you're getting, the high quality of the learning that you'll be able to achieve. And we hope that Insights will turn something that's rather intangible, like this sort of felt sense about how we're doing as a therapist, into something tangible, measurable, that can speed up this cycle of learning a bit. But of course, there are some pitfalls with reflective practice. When reflective practice without objective data somewhere in that feedback loop, I think can We can have the problem where we're just reflecting, but just reaffirming that we're great, either but just by telling us that, or selectively looking at evidence. For example, the middle picture showing that this person, this therapist, has a queue outside of their door of all of these people that want to be in therapy. And so thinking, oh, if my books are full, I must be good. No, I don't think that's actually evidence that we're good. It's evidence we're in demand. It's not evidence we're actually getting outcomes. The other pitfall is that perhaps we've got a supervisor that just agrees us, maybe is too affirming. And the research about feedback shows that for beginning therapists, having positive feedback is really beneficial because it boosts their confidence, it helps them experiment, makes them braver. But for experienced therapists, actually having critical feedback, or sometimes called negative feedback, being mistakes being pointed out, that's the feedback that's likely to produce better outcomes. And so what I want to do in the spirit of growth mindset, and because I know that what I'm trying to do is here in this webinar, develop a culture of reflective practice and continual improvement, I want to share my data and show you what I learned about myself. And I just learned this about myself recently. We've been playing around with insights for a while. We've been doing internal testing. I've known what my results have been for a while. And at first I was actually really pleased. I was like, fantastic, this is great. I've got a high effect size. But it was only in the last couple of weeks that I actually drilled down into that data and looked at my treatment results over time. I'll take you back to this graph showing that the average therapist, 61% of them, are getting worse over time. And I wonder if you can guess what's happened to me. I started my first year of practice. I had a great effect size, and then it dropped a bit, and then it went up a bit, and then it kept on dropping. And so really the first 5 years of me practicing as a psychologist, I was pretty good. I was going along well. But it kept on dropping and dropping. And then last year, which is where that data ends, it's actually pretty low. And so this was a real shock for me. And honestly, like I looked at the aggregated data and saw that on average I was doing fine. But then when you break it up by year, it shows me that I've got to be doing something different. If I continue on this trajectory, then that's not the sort of therapist that I want to be, really. And so I've got to do something dramatically different because what I've been doing hasn't worked. And so in the last couple of weeks, when I've got access to this, I've thought about why, what's at play here. And first of all, David and I were looking at this data and I was like, oh, David, it's my client's fault. It's because they're all chronically unwell and it's my caseload. And then David, in the way that he does, gently suggested that maybe it wasn't just that maybe it was something to do with the fact that I'm distracted. And thinking about it more, I think that this is what happened for me, in that when I first became a therapist, I was on a very steep learning curve, really steep, getting better and better. And when I graduated, I was feeling good. And then what happened over the years is that my development plateaued and now stagnated because I was stuck in automaticity, just going through the motions of therapy, resting on my laurels, thinking, oh, it's good enough. And I think I did that because of the challenge of cognitive load for a few reasons. Being a psychologist, seeing patients, running NovoPsych, being involved with my practice. My cognitive load was really huge. And so in an effort to reduce my cognitive load in therapy, I just went on automatic pilot. And I thought that was okay. Honestly, I just thought I could get away with it. But those results that I've recently learned showed that I can't get away with it. I just can't. And so what I've learned during that process and what I think that we can all do is acknowledge that there is new information that is available that we can learn about ourselves. And know that even if that information gives us professional self-doubt, that professional self-doubt is actually a gift that gives us curiosity and openness and a sense of responsibility. And one thing that I'm resolved to do and really work on is to surround myself with curious and forever learning colleagues that will support me in that learning approach. And I think that what we've all got to do when we learn this stuff about ourselves is question our approach, question what we're doing, but not who we are. That's the growth mindset. A failure is not about the person fundamentally, it's about how they approached it. And the other thing is to not only get supportive supervision, but also get critical supervision. So all of those things are things that I'm going to do in the hope to bend that curve back in the other direction. So finally, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about evidence-based practice versus practice-based evidence. Certainly going through training programs, we're all taught about evidence-based practice and how we've got to read all of the research that there possibly is, journal articles, textbooks. We can see in this picture, it looks like she's read every book under the sun. But she can read all the rigorous trials she wants. If it's not actually connected to her practice, the way that she's performing at work, it's not going to help. And so I want to contrast evidence-based practice with practice-based evidence, where step one of that, to produce your own practice-based evidence, is to engage in routine outcome monitoring at the level of the individual patient, aggregate that data and identify areas of growth, create some hypotheses about what you think is going to improve things for maybe individual patients, but also your practice, your career as a whole. And then evaluate the evidence. Are the changes that you've put in place helping? And this process of developing practice-based evidence, it's not something that you can do just by clicking that button up the top with Insights, right? It does most of the work for you. But the real process of learning from it, developing from it, using the insights that it will provide you is really going to take years to get the most out of it. And my hope is that we can turn around the 61% of therapists, including me, who are getting worse over time, that Insights provides an opportunity to bend that a little bit in the other direction. And of course, if you produce practice-based evidence, it means that you can create some great summaries of your practice. Here, I want to show you something that we did at Foundation Psychology. We used Insights to collate this data, and we collected data between 2013 and 2023, so 10 years. And this data is looking at 100 episodes of care. And what we're able to show is a summary of our treatment effectiveness, that the average patient comes in the severe range, leaves in the moderate range, that our effect size at our practice is 0.81, and that is decent, is good. We're also able to look at client satisfaction. We send out surveys, the client satisfaction survey, which is available in NovoPsych, to every patient that gets discharged now, post-discharge. And we're able to see that 87% of them had a positive experience. And what I hope is that every year we can look at this data and we can think, all right, how was the last year? As a practice, are we getting worse? Are we staying the same? Are we getting better? And looking at client satisfaction, I think, provided us with some really rich results. Client satisfaction will be coming to Insights, so you'll actually be able to aggregate data in Insights shortly. But what we found when we looked at our client satisfaction data was that it asked about a whole bunch of domains that the clients could rate us on. And we found that the strength was therapist understanding, but the weakness by far was clients saying that they weren't able to get appointment times that were convenient, and that therapists weren't available when they wanted them to be. And so for us, that really provides us with some feedback that we've got to do better at that, because it's really impacting our clients. And even though it's a nice problem to have in that we're all full and everything, that being full is one metric from maybe a business perspective that might be important, but really from a client satisfaction perspective, we've got to do better at allocating clients and making ourselves available and looking after our existing clients. The other thing that we can do when we've got this data is think about our areas of strength. This is some data that I wanted to know about how I was doing with my area of special interest. So I did my doctorate in body dysmorphic disorder, and I wanted to know whether I was actually effective at treating people with body dysmorphic disorder, whether I was able to turn all of that academic brats and stats studies into something that actually made a difference in people's lives. And so I looked at the data for the appearance anxiety inventory and was able to show that 69% of people were improving, which was a Cohen's D of 1.24, which is great, which is really good, and is good, if not better, than the published literature. And so by looking at my data in this specific area, I was able to make the evidence-based decision that I will only see people with body dysmorphic disorder because it's an area of relative strength for me. And I think that if we can all do that and not just say that we specialize in something, but actually think, are we actually doing what we hope we're doing? I think that it'll elevate our profession a great deal. So how do we get access to insights? I think I alluded to before that people that are on the unlimited plan are actually changing the name of the unlimited plan to Pro Plus Insights. So anyone that's already on that will get access to insights automatically at no extra cost. It's just going to be bundled in with your plan. For anyone else that wants access to insight, whether you're part of a practice or on a pro plan, you can email us to activate insights. And we'll need to upgrade to a plan that has it baked in. And so we really hope that you'll do that. I said before that a practice leader that I spoke to said that would take 100 hours to collate the data. Insights has certainly taken us more than 100 days to put together. And so we hope we'll make that easier for you. A few other sort of things I want to talk about just to finish up is that people often say treatment and who the therapist is only accounts for a very small effect of change in clients. And indeed, 86% of the variance in client outcomes has nothing to do with therapy. And so what this means is that we really need to have quite large data sets to get rid of the random variation. And so we can tease out the different factors that are creating the change for our clients. And I suppose it's also a word of warning that there is lots going on in the client's life and that we are not superheroes. We will never be able to help 100% of the people that we see. And what's going on in the client's life, whether they get hit by a bus, lose their job, get married, win the lottery, has a way huger impact on their outcomes, their happiness, their DAS scores than anything that happens in therapy. But just because there's lots that's outside of our control, there is still lots that is within our control, like developing a good relationship, getting high quality feedback, making sure that we're not burnt out, knowing that we are the tool and we've got to invest in ourselves in order to do the best work for our clients. And while there are lots of ingredients to therapy, and I wholeheartedly believe that therapy is more of an art than a science, I think we could probably all agree that what we're looking for is that end result, that better quality of life for the client, or the symptom reduction. And all of those specific elements that the therapist brings, that the patient brings, all get mixed up, all get mixed together in a unique way for each one of us. And that what's going on in the therapy room will still be really individual, but we can measure that end result that comes from it. And so a little bit of a summary. We've got to step back sometimes. We've got to say, where are we in our journey as a therapist, as a psychologist? And we've got to remember that the quality of the feedback that we receive, not only from individual patients, but also the feedback as a whole, the quality of the feedback determines the quality of our learning. And there's a picture there that shows that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. It's also showing that sometimes we need to have a map to show the way forward when we're in a forest. And I hope that Insights feature can be a map for you to give you a sense of perspective and a bird's eye view of what's happening in your practice. So once again, if you want to activate Insights, do email us at info@novopsych.com. We'll activate it for you.
There's a question there from Jill saying, with regards to Insights, what's the minimum number of data points you recommend collecting before re-examining the data? I think it depends a lot on what you're looking at. Some of those trend lines in some of the plots probably require a bit more data. So you're talking about maybe upwards of 30 separate episodes of care, and by that first and last kind of assessments. But some of the other stuff, reliable change, the effect size stuff, maybe just slightly smaller than that. And the active clients tab where you're seeing your current intake doesn't require that much for some of those plots. For some of them, I would say upwards of 30 episodes of care, but for others, maybe around 20 or so.
Yeah.
Would you add anything to that, Ben?
Yeah. For the active client one, I think that it could be one, really. But if you're wanting to evaluate your outcomes, yeah, I was going to say about 20. It does have confidence intervals. So the more data you have, the smaller the confidence.
That's right.
The more confident you can be in the data.
Yeah. Both Mindy and Monique were asking about whether the SRS and ORS could be included, but I think Chris just answered that by saying that both of them are copyrighted.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So if you want to, the measures that I'd recommend in place of them are the Personal Wellbeing Index, which is this broad spectrum measure about the quality of the perceived quality of their life. So and I think it is important to get the right measure, right? So I use the DAS, but I know that some people like to have more of a strengths-based way of thinking about things. And so the PWIA, Personal Wellbeing Index, is a good one. And we will eventually add that to Insights. And for the Relationship and Therapeutic Alliance, the ARM5, Agnew Relationship Scale, is designed to be administered every session to get immediate feedback about the relationship. The client satisfaction scale, which isn't used every session, we use it at discharge, and we'd encourage you to do that too. That will be available in Insights. So you can compare your particular practice and the client satisfaction against what we think are normative benchmarks of what the average practice is getting. Is another one.
Got a question here from Zoe. Is it possible to add the DAS-Y or RCADs to the assessment tools you can use in the Insight option for those of us working with children or young adolescents?
I think the DAS-Y is going to be pretty easy to add. So we're going to be working through the outcome assessments and be adding more over time. I think that some of the ones that are on our agenda, top priorities are PCL5. Lots of people working in the PTSD space and doing EMDR in particular would benefit from that, because while the DAS might not change a lot, the PCL5 will be sensitive to changes.
And then I've got Louisa asking, I'm in a school with 3 clinicians. Would the practice option be suitable for us to use in a school?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Jenna's asked, would it be a free trial with dummy data? If possible, please. That's a very good suggestion, Jenna. We will be publishing data dummy on the website, so you can actually play around with everything there is to do with Insights without an account, so you can just see exactly what you're getting. So that will be published on our website in the next couple of weeks. I hope you found it enjoyable and you learned something, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you. See ya.